And this is one of the sessions I've been looking forward to the absolute most, not least because I have a very serious box set habit. And some of the things which I have been watching when I should have been working on deeply important climate topics are things like My Octopus Teacher, True Detective, and Unstable, which I have a little bit of an obsession with. So I'm so excited to have some of the creators and producers from those shows with us. And also Ali Weinstein, who many of you will know from the Hollywood Climate Summit, but who is also the sustainability content lead at the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance. So can we give it up? Can we make some noise? Can we have some Tuesday afternoon energy for Ali?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around for our last session of the day. We're so excited to have you here. As Solly mentioned, my name is Ali Weinstein. My pronouns are she, her. And this is my second time speaking at Solutions House, but my first time speaking under my new role as content lead at the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance, which I'm so excited about. If you were here for earlier sessions, Sam kind of gave some context to a bit of a rebrand we had to be SEA, and part of that is because we are really diving into content and acknowledging the connections between making changes on the production side that are more environmentally friendly, as well as getting more climate content on screen. So that's where my role comes in. And you may also know me as a co-founder of the Hollywood Climate Summit. As that was all happening, I actually also came up on the TV writing side of things, working in writers' rooms for Netflix and NBC and AMC. So this role is kind of an incredible culmination of all of my favorite things, and that's why I'm so excited to be talking with some creatives tonight from shows that you hopefully already recognize and love. So this format's gonna be a little different than the other panels. I'm gonna invite each creative up to watch a couple of clips with you and have a conversation, and then we'll invite everyone up at the end to ask some questions to the group and then some audience questions. So first, I would love to invite up Victor Fresco. He is the creator, executive producer, and writer of season 1 of Unstable. Victor, is there any context you want to give to the show before we...
No, it's a Netflix show with Rob Lowe and his son, John Owen Lowe, based loosely on their real relationship.
Cool. With that, let's dive into some clips. We can go ahead and play clips 1 and 2.
40 billion tons of climate-changing carbon gases.
All right!
So the scenes that you all just got to see were a bit of the beginning and a bit of the end of the first season, so apologies for the spoiler alert. But I was curious, where did the inspiration for this show come from? I know that Rob and John were very involved in the creation of it, so what was their interest in climate or this subject? How did you guys pitch this?
You're right. So they have an interesting relationship where Rob posts online and then Johnny trolls him and makes fun of him, right? So there was a clip of Rob saying, you know, you're not exercising until you break a sweat, and he's standing there without a shirt, sweating, and Johnny trolls him and says the subtle art of standing in front of your own Emmys, right? Because his Emmys are behind him. So giving him a lot of crap online, that became, since they're both actors, they thought, how do we turn that into a TV show? So they were looking for a writer to help them with that. And then the idea was very loose of Rob wanted to play a version of Rob, I think, which is, you know, or what would be more of a captain of industry kind of guy, successful captain of industry. We didn't know what the area was going to be. So then it came to me. And so I look at that and I think, yes, there could be a show there. That's a fun relationship. How do I make that character likable? Because billionaires, although we never say he's a billionaire, but he's very successful captain of industry, inherently to me are not likable people that you root for. So it's like, how do we do that? Well, what if he was, and then it just became, like a lot of writers, it's a lot of what ifs. What if he was doing something bigger than trying to make money? What if he was doing something that helped humanity? What could that be? You know, originally I thought about, you know, maybe coming up with alternatives to plastics was interesting to me. That's already being done, and I thought, you know, climate change obviously is important to me. The idea of carbon capture I knew about, but then I was just researching, and you know, the next step is using that captured carbon for something, and then there are people actually working on this to try and use that for cement or concrete, which would be a game changer if you could capture. So then it just became, that seemed really interesting to me. That being said, you know, these are the two scenes in the show that are really about that. I mean, everything else, you know, it's really about their relationship, and it's a workplace office comedy, and that's what they're working on in the background. That's the main thing that they're trying to accomplish.
Do you feel like because it was so integrated into the plot and the characters, it was much easier? I know sometimes it's hard to get climate ideas through in a room or in development. Do you feel like it was easier because they were so connected to those plot points?
This element was probably number 10 on the list of 10 things that I would pitch to them in terms of importance, right? Because, you know, their original feeling was it's too complicated. Like explaining that process, which didn't seem complicated to me, they were concerned that that's too complicated. Capturing carbon and turning it into something else. You know, what I felt like people will understand it, and for those that don't, all they need to know is they're working on something smart, and they're all smart, right? Like when you watch ER and you see them all doing doctory stuff and you don't know what the hell they're doing, all it's telling you, like this first clip where he goes into some techno stuff, that's just meant to say this guy knows his stuff, right? He's not just a rich guy, he's actually a scientist. So it doesn't matter to me if the audience is understanding it. It'd be better if they don't, but they don't have to. In that, all I want for them to know is that they're successful and smart and they're working on something they feel passionate about. Extra bonus points if you can follow it. I don't think it's hard to follow. I think we're successful. I do think you don't ever want to come in with, this is an idea that's going to address climate change, unless you're making a documentary, because that's not the business they're in. So you come in with an entertaining idea, and then you try and hide the ball of what, if you can have a message in there, they're okay with that as long as this is not a show about that message.
Yes, yeah. Often in the industry, it'll be referred to as hiding the spinach or the broccoli or whatever.
Right.
I guess in that sense, do you feel, how did this become a comedy? I mean, obviously, Rob and John seem more comedy interesting, but it's like hard to make a comedy about climate.
Well, they wanted to do a comedy, and I only work in a half-hour world, so once they came to me, it was going to be a half hour. So, you know, you can do family comedies, you can do office comedy. This was going to be kind of both. It's an office comedy with a big family element, because it's father and son who have a very tricky relationship who work together in this office. It was always going to be in that, you know, in that office world, and it could have been, you know, they could have been selling paper, they could have been, we're going to do something a little more upscale than that. So then it just became, I like biotech, I like working in the world of science because I like working with smart people, or people that say smart things who are not necessarily well-adjusted socially is interesting to me. So that gave me an opportunity to populate it with characters that I like to write. So I knew it was going to be science-y. I don't know much about tech. Biotech is really interesting to me, so that's how it ended up settling in there.
Yeah, and to that point of maybe not knowing so much about biotech, were there any resources or organizations that you worked with to kind of hone in on those more scientific elements?
Google. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it, and I think a lot of writers are just curious people about everything. So you're curious about relationships, but you can be curious about the world that you're going to inhabit in a series. So once I knew I wanted to be in that world, and carbon, I knew about carbon capture, and then I just started to go online and research that. Netflix has resources, and then they went through the script, and they had very technical, which was funny because it's not what we're doing, but it was just because it was so technical, and this could be explained like this, but because it's not a drama and it's not a documentary, it's really on the surface of it. And then when I realized at the time, like, I hadn't thought of this at the time, so I realized it after, that most stories about climate change are dystopian worlds of how messed up everything became because of climate change. And I think the reason people latched onto this in that context is because this is more aspirational. It's saying, like, it's a comedy. It's not about the fear and the dread and the horrors of climate change, which are very real, but it's about this group of really dedicated people who want to help, who want to do something. And it feels like we're just years away from that happening. It doesn't feel so science fiction-y that you can't relate to it.
Yeah, no, I think it is. It has been so popular because of how grounded it feels. And I guess to that point, Rob Lowe's character Ellis is kind of, right, no one says he's a billionaire, but he kind of seems like the billionaire savior type,
right.
Like he's going to fix the whole world. But his character also, is going through a lot of kind of mental health issues and feels all this pressure. And it is sort of a sign that we can't really put all of that on one person, nor is like that the actual solution to the climate crisis. And so how did you have that conversation and build out all these other amazing, intelligent characters around him to help him?
Right. I mean, it's true, it's a trap that it's not up to billionaires to solve this problem. But I'd rather have more billionaires on our side of the problem than on the other side of the problem. So, Rob, and, if it was my perfect world, we would not have billionaires. I don't think we need them, right? So, not them as individuals, but as a class of people, I think, as an oligarch class of people, I don't think they're helpful. So, but here we are. So I'm glad if there are some that are trying to do something productive rather than just make more money, which is how I view most of them. So the show did not start with a political, cultural message. The show started with a relationship, and then how do we build that out and be funny, and who are these other people, and what are their issues? And so the backdrop of we're trying to do something good, I think helps us like this guy, in spite of, so it's an interesting question because my mission is not to make America like billionaires. But that could be, right, like you look at this and go, yeah, that's a nice billionaire who's doing good stuff. And but I think that's a danger. You don't want to invest the future of the planet into 400 billionaires that can decide whether they want to help the planet or not.
Sure.
In this case, he's a good billionaire, but he's pretty self-absorbed, and the character is pretty narcissistic.
Yeah, I think you do a good job balancing it. And I think that's why those other characters are so helpful and important, is like you really need a team and a collective in order to create those solutions.
And then he's around a lot of young people. It's Rob, and Sean Clifford is the woman who plays opposite him, and she's, whatever, 40s. And then most of the, what I call the kids, most of the show is, John Lowe and, or John Owen Lowe, and there's like 3 other 28-year-olds. And so I feel like those are fun to write because they have a lot of passion about everything. They feel everything strongly, and they feel very committed to doing something. I've got kids, little younger than that, but they're all thinking in terms of bigger issues than just themselves, and they're more invested in the world and the future. And that's what I like about writing these guys. Also, they're bigger. They understand the import. And they're smart on the show, so they can actually do something productive.
Yeah, no, I love that too. And the intergenerational workplace that you have, I think is really important. Well, thank you so much, Victor. We are going to bring up our next guest, and then you'll come back at the end. If we could bring up Mary Jo Winkler. Mary Jo is the executive producer of True Detective Night Country. We're so excited to have her. Yay. Mary Jo, is there any sort of context to
so for anyone who hasn't seen True Detective, it is the 4th season of the anthology, and it is about 2 female detectives who are solving a crime in the high Arctic, surrounding the disappearance of 8 scientists from a Arctic research facility that is tangential to a mine that is toxically polluting an indigenous community. In addition, there's a cold case of a murdered and missing and murdered indigenous woman. And this clip is a lead up, a rally for a protest that the community is about to embark on.
Well, yeah, we can go ahead and play clip 3. So that is a very powerful scene within the show, but it is also only one of many of the nuanced, layered climate stories that exist throughout the season. And layers those climate stories, I think, in one of the best examples of scripted drama I've seen of climate storytelling. So I guess how did the atmosphere of this show inspire it, and where did this idea originate for Issa, and how did you work with her to develop that, kind of be inspired by Alaska?
Yeah. So Issa, when she took on pitching to HBO for the show, she wanted to do something complete. She was a huge fan of True Detective season 1, and she wanted to do something completely opposite of the first season, which was very male, very hot, very sweaty. She wanted to do female, cold, ice, Arctic. She dreamt that idea up, and then proceeded to think of places in the Arctic, and landed on Alaska, and did a lot of research about communities in the high Arctic. And this was all kind of during the pandemic, so she couldn't really travel or kind of go deep into it. So she, watched Alaskan Troopers, and she looked at TikTok videos of what was going on in these communities. And she always had she has a theme in a lot of her work. She's from Mexico City, and a lot of her films deal with violence against women. So she started to uncover themes in these communities. And once I joined forces with her, we took a trip to Alaska, and we went to the high Arctic. We traveled to Nome, and then we traveled to Kotzebue, which is about 29 miles above the Arctic Circle. And we met a Nubiak family, and had a meal with them, and talked about the realities of living in the high Arctic and what is happening to them in terms of the erasure of their culture and climate change. And the sort of patriarch of that family is a man named Lance Kramer, who is a knowledge specialist and is working to preserve the Inupiaq culture and subsistence learning in the community. So we learned a lot from scouting, going into different, into the community, into churches and we went to graveyards, and we went to grocery stores, and just traveled around the high Arctic in the freezing cold. We jumped on a rickety old sled on a snowmobile and took a ride across the frozen ocean. And it was amazing to sort of be in that environment. And then Issa sort of took what we learned from that trip, and it really, it was very instrumental in the writing and sort of added another layer to the writing. We also hired two Indigenous producers, Princess Johnson and Kathy Tagnac-Rexford. Kathy Tagnac is a Nubiaq, so we did a lot of sort of sharing of stories and consulting, and Issa really used the environment and some of the stories, particularly some of the injustices of the community, to sort of go deeper in character and plot. And really, our desire was to really be reflective of the realities of the world that we're living in, particularly for these communities.
Yeah, and were there any moments that ended up in the show that were sort of a direct reflection of the Indigenous communities you spoke to? Or I guess also how did the actors, I know Jodie Foster thanked the Indigenous communities in her recent Emmy win speech, so congratulations. But how did you kind of interpret that into the show?
Yeah, so we did a lot of, Princess and Tagnac actually worked with each department with our design and costumes, and shared their stories, shared the stories of that community, and really acted as sort of, helped us get all of the details right. And, we talked to them about the loss, the fact that the permafrost is unstable, and they're very vulnerable, and they're experiencing issues with food and fishing. And as you learned in that clip, as a matter of fact, when we were in prep, there are increased catastrophic climate occurrences happening all the time there. And so when we were in prep, there was actually a typhoon superstorm in Nome, which was devastating. Foundations of buildings swept away. And so we did actually a big fundraiser on our production to try to help that community. In addition, 2 days before we were going to shoot, there's a scene in the show that takes place in a crab factory. And 2 days before we were going to shoot the scene, there was an article in the New York Times that came out about snow crab fishing ending. Because of the warming waters, 90% of the crab population was gone. So they just stopped fishing it. And so, we were up against it, and Issa was like, all right. I was like, we have to address this. Otherwise, this is going to be strange that it no longer happens and it's in our show. And so she just wrote in a line that, it's a shit year for crab, for crab this year, just to try to be current, because she constructed that around a fish factory that we had visited when we were there.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I feel like that's a great example of why it's so important to be telling these stories in real time. And I love that you shifted in the moment to really represent that. And I feel like that's why we so often say that if your story doesn't include climate, it is science fiction. It's like these things are happening. And I really love that you made those changes right there and then to represent that.
Yeah.
I guess to that point, this season of True Detective feels different than the other seasons, and especially for maybe kind of OG True Detective fans. But overall, what were you hoping the audiences really take from this season?
Well, I think first of all, it is told through a female perspective, and through the lens of the female gaze, and I think that really wanting to shine a light on the injustices of the community, but also detective genre is very entertaining. So in a way, it was a kind of sneaky way to get all of these themes of, violence against women, environmental racism, climate action, the distrust of law enforcement for some of these communities. So we wanted to be reflective, and we wanted it to be rooted in reality.
Yeah. No, I think you were definitely successful in that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mary Jo. Ogden. She is the associate producer and production manager of the Academy Award-winning My Octopus Teacher and a co-founder of the Sea Change Project. Welcome, Swati. So we're about to watch 2 clips from My Octopus Teacher, and I hope you all have seen it at this point. It's incredible, but do you want to give any context to where we're dropping into the film?
Yeah, I think we're doing one of the early scenes where Craig makes that decision to go into the water every single day. And that's the one scene we're showing. And that the other scene we're showing is when just after that, he spent a lot of time with her and they built that trust and that relationship when they have that wonderful moment of, being together. So those are the 2 scenes that you'll be seeing. Yeah.
Amazing. Let's play those 2 clips.
It's a hard thing to explain.
So this film came out kind of in the depths of the pandemic when a lot of us, I know when I first watched it, I was isolating at my partner's mom's home in New Jersey. I felt very isolated, and I watched it and I felt really reconnected with the world. And I know in the beginning of this film, Craig explains that he kind of came into exploring scuba diving again in a really hard time in his life. And so why do you feel how did the nature really affect him and kind of bringing him back to himself? And why did you feel that was important to share in the story?
So at the time, Craig had so many back-to-back. So the film came out much after he'd actually had the encounter with her and spent time in the ocean. So we're going back a couple of years to before the film was even made, when we had no idea we were going to make a film. It was just Craig was going through burnout, and he was going through anxiety, depression, all of that comes with that level of burnout. And he was also feeling incredibly disconnected from nature, strangely enough, even though he'd just come off the back of 3 big films with crocodiles and in the Okavango Delta and in Costa Rica and all of it. But I think it was just deadlines and pressure and all of it. And even in those films, he didn't feel like he was connecting with the environment that he was portraying in the films. So that's why he decided that to heal himself, the place that he knows best is the water. So we thought that was important because I think a lot of people go through burnout and a lot of people struggle with a lot of issues for whatever reason. And we know from experience that being in nature really helps. If you have a conscious connection and you make that conscious connection and you step into nature, I'm not talking about just walking through a space. To walk through and to actually feel what is happening around you is 2 very different experiences. And when you do that, you come into contact with your own self and humanity through what it is that you're feeling in the environment. And it's incredibly, incredibly healing. So I think we felt that we didn't have to bang home that point in the film, but I think to set it up in that way, because that was authentically what drove him into the water for all those days then in which he had that experience with her, was important to keep in the story.
Yeah, I think it felt very relatable. And I guess, why do you feel that documentary is an important medium for that? Because I know a lot of us don't always have privilege to go into these environments and explore these things firsthand. And so what do you feel that this story and documentary in general really brings to allow people to reconnect with nature in that way?
Yeah, I think in the last few years, actually in the last decade, a lot of our attention on climate change has been in a carbon silo. We're all worried about how much carbon is being emitted. We're worried about how much carbon we must sequester. We worry about how much carbon needs to be captured. We want to get a zero net emissions. Climate change is actually a symptom of a bigger disease on the planet, and that's the loss of biodiversity. Really, that's singularly the greatest threat that we face, because that is our life support system, right? So, but it's a complex, again, as the previous filmmakers explained, these are complex issues to kind of put out. And if you do, how do you put it out? Does it become too scientific? Does it become too dogmatic? Does it become too hopeless? Then you're going to lose your audience. And compared to the other 2 films that you saw, this is, of course, a nature documentary, but at the same time, because of the relationship we had with her and the way we decided to tell the story, I think it crossed a few genres. So it wasn't just a natural history film or a nature film. It somehow transcended that. But I think that's why it became important that we could, we didn't have to talk about it and we didn't have to say it in as many words, but if we could somehow make people feel that wild places and wild beings are your family and it's your home and that's where all of us belong, then maybe that idea of biodiversity gets embedded a little bit deeper.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's really felt in the film. And I really admire how much the narrative feels very almost octopus-led. It doesn't feel like it's humans kind of coming in and imposing a story on her. So what was the process? I think a lot of people who are not in the film space think documentaries are like, you shoot the footage and then it's made, but there's a lot of narrative structure that's involved. So what kind of inspired all those nature-led moments?
It was really actually natural. We had Sarah here from Netflix, who was our exec producer. I think Craig was surrounded by a team of women. There was Sarah from Netflix, who was our exec producer. There was Ellen Windermouth, who was the other exec producer, longtime associate and friend of Craig's. There was me, there was Pippa, one of the directors of the film. So I think firstly that, and secondly, it's just the whole experience that Craig had and the transformation that he had and everything that he experienced came from her, from all of what he felt he'd learned from her, which was, even in the tracking underwater, which is something that he's established, because there are not too many people who know how to track underwater. That is something he does, but that also came about because of his curiosity that drove him to kind of try and understand firstly the Great African Sea Forest, which is the ecosystem that you see, the kelp forest. And then once he had seen this octopus and he found her, then to kind of understand her better, I think the tracking really, really helped. So you could not have done this film without the octopus's point of view, because everything in the film, even though it's his human experience, came because something that she showed him or she introduced him to, or created a situation where therefore that's what drove the story. So we had to, it was organic. It wasn't like something we sat down and crafted.
Right.
That was just the best way to tell the story.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. And I know that this experience really inspired both of you, and you created an organization called the Sea Change Project. So would you mind telling everyone a little bit about that and what you work on?
Yeah, so it was Craig actually co-founded the Sea Change Project. So the Sea Change Project is a not-for-profit organization. It's a small organization. We're based in Cape Town. We have sort of 3 pillars that we stand on. So the first is the way we look at what we're doing is we're grounded in, so it's a lot of science. So a lot of our storytelling is very much based in science. Even with my Octopus Teacher, we had an octopus scientist, we had an octopus psychologist, we had people who really knew octopus, so we could fact check everything that we put in the film. So we're grounded in science. We are guided by indigenous wisdom because of all the years that Craig spent in the Kalahari with the San people, and the rest of us in Sea Change. We've all had our own experiences with indigenous people and indigenous wisdoms, and our way of being in nature is very much a practice. It's not something we do, it's actually a practice. That we're in the water every single day in the Great African Sea Forest. So we're grounded in science, we're guided by indigenous wisdom, and we're inspired by nature. So all of our storytelling comes from our daily interactions in the Great African Sea Forest. So what we do is really storytelling for ocean conservation.
That's incredible. I really encourage you all to check out the work that they do. And now I would love to invite Mary Jo and Victor back up to the stage. Thank you so much, Swati. So I just wanted to come bring you all together again to kind of reflect. Was there anything from listening to each other? You all work in such different genres and mediums that gives you kind of reflection on your own genre and medium that you work in with climate storytelling.
I wanted to know if the octopus psychologist was an octopus.
So it's really because so much of their intelligence, their brain is in their bodies and their limbs, in their arms really. And they have like 2,000 suckers on the arm, and each sucker they can manipulate individually. And then all of the camouflage and the color changes that they do. So a lot of their communication is through their bodies. So to understand a few things, you needed someone who understood octopus. So they could say, oh, if she's in this pose, this is what she's portraying, or if she's changed this color, this is what she's doing, or that's where the psychology part, comes in.
Can I ask one more octopus question? Because I think if anyone saw it, because it is from the perspective of the octopus, do you think the octopus felt affection for him?
That is we get asked that a lot, and I would say it's one of the hardest questions to answer. What I would say is that in this particular situation, it was incredibly unique that you had the same animal respond to a human over and over and over. And it wasn't like, oh, this octopus responded to every human who went in the water like that. It was him. So there was something there that created that synergy. Now, whether that was affection on her part, or it was she just started seeing him as something in the environment that belonged, it's hard to say. But it was an incredibly unique situation.
I think relatable for those of us who have dogs or cats, because that felt like that kind of relationship.
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mary Jo, did you have something to add or no?
No, it was just reflecting on sort of the connection to nature.
Yeah.
And that you feel it so much in the film. And there was something that it did, and maybe it was because, it wasn't because of the pandemic, but I think it was one of those films that really reset, and I think just in connection to working with the Inupiaq people and the indigenous cultures, the deep, deep connection to Mother Earth, and was just present in everything that we did.
Yeah, definitely. And those inspirations, I was curious, I know everyone in the audience comes from a lot of different cross sectors of climate and maybe industries outside of Hollywood, but I personally believe that every job and every industry sparks creativity. There's an opportunity for climate storytelling. So for all of you, do you have any advice for the audience about how climate has sparked creativity for you, or how to kind of find those sparks?
I mean, I think my takeaway from this is we're all in the business of touching people emotionally. Whether it's harder to do. I think in comedy, maybe just because I'm in comedy, I feel like what I do is hard. But when I watch Octopus is amazing. What's it called? The Octopus. I feel like the power in that is how it touches us emotionally, as opposed to many documentaries that you feel you're being educated, right? But you're not. And it's the same with good drama and the same with good comedy. So I think you start from that. For me, as a writer of narrative, we start with why do we give a shit? What is compelling about this? Not how do I teach people anything, but what is interesting and what connects people emotionally to these characters or to this story. That's where it starts.
Definitely.
And then hopefully you can come up with, if your heart is in the right place and you can come up with an important cultural message also, then it's it becomes more important to you as an artist, I think, because now you're trying to say something.
And I think that you can infuse it. I mean, just to think about infusing the realities of climate change into everything that you do. I mean, again, Issa was inspired by the environment and by what was happening in a community, and really drove really developed the characters and drove the plot forward from what she took from her research of these communities. So I think you can find it in a variety of places. And I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to really reflect what's really happening in the world, because I think our industry doesn't have enough of that.
I mean, I loved Unstable and I loved True Detective as well. I've seen both, and I think in storytelling, when you have engaging characters, whether it's a comedy or something like True Detective, I think when you have such engaging characters, you go on that emotional journey with them, then you care about what they care about. And I think so therefore it's like you have this opportunity for them to kind of either represent something, or as in the case of Unstable, even though, as you said, it's really about that relationship, which is so great. But even in that relationship, what's really interesting is, even though the son feels a little bit devalued because, he's a musician and the dad's like this, tech sort of billionaire guy, but there's something in the dad's work that he slowly starts to see has a bigger kind of effect or resonance to humanity in a sense. And so there's that kind of dynamic as well. So I think because you care about those characters, you then naturally pay attention to what is being said. And the same with True Detective. Firstly, I found it was incredible how just the environment, it was just the environment was so jaw-dropping, and with the snow and the ice, and then when you realize there's almost different words and languages and feelings for each of the way the snow falls or the ice is, and then you see the indigenous mythology woven into that. And then, of course, I mean, in Alaska, we've heard about all of those indigenous women who've been murdered and who've just vanished and disappeared. And then you have that, and then you have the climate crisis. And so again, you have this emotional engagement that happens with all of the characters. So then you really care about what's happening in the environment. So I think that's really it.
I think that for True Detective is very intersectional. I think that you can be very effective when you touch upon certain themes. And it was also, not to brag, but it was the most watched True Detective of any True Detective. So we had a very wide audience. Amazing.
We have time for maybe 2 questions from the audience, if anyone has any questions. Oh, back there. Yep.
Guys, thanks so much for this session. Do you have any tips for people who are maybe climate tech CEOs but have a secret script that they've been working on for a climate entertainment?
So I've pitched a lot of shows and I've been lucky enough to sell many. What they're buying is, I think, and why climate can help us is that, or stories about climate can help you, is that they're buying your passion for a subject. So if you're pitching something and you feel passionate about it, that's infectious in a room of executives that you're pitching to. So if you're passionate about climate change and you can do a story that also has interesting characters and interesting emotion, but what drives the passion is this important, compelling story that has to be told about what's happening to our planet, I think that's helpful. In terms of writing a script, if you're writing a script on spec, that's a whole different topic. But I do feel like you want to find, what's the emotional core of it? Why do we care about these people? And then what is the series going to be, right? Because a lot of people write pilots and they're not sure from an executive point of view, like, well, we don't know where the series is going. So that's also important to have an idea of what the first season could look like. And then beyond the first season, even if it's a show that could be on for years, what do 5 years of that show kind of look like too? So for me, when I write, I just ask myself a lot of questions because I know those are all the questions that they're thinking about.
Yeah. And any other questions? Yeah, back there.
I'm very curious about how to create a sustainable set. Very curious.
Sustainable set?
Yeah. Do any of you, we had some panels earlier in the day where we had some very large question and we could talk about it for hours. But I think the first thing you have to do is care about creating a sustainable set. There are a lot of resources out in the world. Greenproductionguide.com. The Directors Guild of America has the DGA Pro Tips, Sustainability Pro Tips that you can go Google and find those. Albert is another organization. All of those resources can give you step-by-step ideas for how to address sustainability on set.
Yeah, and the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance has a new website that we just launched where you can kind of piece together different resources and kind of send yourself a worksheet of different resources that are specific to your area in terms of production. So that would be really great to check out. Cool. Okay, we'll take one more real quick.
What's your advice for helping to get them over their preconceptions outside of the passion, which I think people bring, but when there's just not that openness to consider that concept from the get-go, how can we help the showrunners move to the next level?
So if you guys couldn't hear, it was a question sort of, and in my opinion, I don't know that it's showrunner specific. I think there's a lot of levels and pieces of Hollywood that have a reticence towards including climate in storytelling. But the question was basically like, how do we get people over that kind of hump of feeling like it's maybe too political or too challenging to integrate into a story?
It's a really good question.
It's a really good question.
I think writers, I can speak for writers, I know a lot of writers, I think they are worried about coming across as preachy. And I think part of the reason is that they've been beaten up in the political world as being preachy, right? You can see on a grand level when Taylor Swift says something, she's attacked. And so writers feel, oh, I just don't want that. I don't want to be attacked because I'm being preachy. The show I did before this, Santa Clarita Diet for Netflix, and this was a woman, Drew Barrymore, wakes up one day and she has to eat human flesh, and so we're thinking, well, who's she going to eat? And we don't want to eat innocent people. So we figure, well, she'll eat Nazis, because Nazis don't have a big constituency that's going to complain about them. And I felt like we're going to get hate mail from Nazis because she's killing Nazis, and we're basically saying it's okay to kill these people if you have to kill somebody. We did not get that. I feel like if I was doing that show now, I probably would be attacked for that, right? So it's a problem because writers are afraid, I think, of feeling preachy and that Bill Maher is going to make fun of you, and right? So I don't really have an answer for it, except I feel like you can do it, you just can't make your show about that, right? It has to be about something else, and you have that. You know, the thing I liked about what we did is it was just an assumption that climate change is happening and we have to fight it. There was no dialogue about, like, is this real? Is this something we should be involved with? We just start from this premise of this is happening and we have to solve it. So I feel like you can do any show that you come up with. You can have, if you were doing Friends now, one of those friends could be working on climate change. You know, it doesn't have to be a show about that. So that's what I would, if I was speaking to a group of writers, that's what I would encourage writers to do, to just have it percolate in the background. We don't have disposable cups on set. You know, our characters carpool. There's a lot of smaller messages that you can also have. But it's totally up to the writer-showrunner, and some writer-showrunners don't care. I think most of them do. That's the good thing. I think most of them do.
Yeah. I mean, for us, you know, actually when we made the film, it kind of was like, is this a natural history film? Is this like a film that's not natural history? Like, what genre would it fit in? And it really helped to have someone like Sarah who saw the potential in it and wasn't so fussed about, okay, what category is this going to fit in, because it was just she found it a powerful enough story that would just appeal in any case. But she had the vision to see that, and then, you know, with Netflix, and then to put it on. But we couldn't have, like, we thought, like, we started out with the idea that it's a wildlife nature documentary, right? That's what we do, and that's how we did it. But it was in the making of it, and when we had the key part of it became the relationship, rather than doing a film, because originally Craig wasn't meant to be in the film. We thought we're just going to do this film on the Great African Sea, like the kelp forest, and it was going to be about octopus behavior, and then that would have been a natural history, like, straightforward film. But then when we brought Craig into the film, because that's when it was the relationship was the thing that made the story. So then when we did that, actually nowhere in this film, nowhere in any of the dialogue, you'll never hear the word conservation. And there's nowhere in the film we've said people shouldn't eat octopus. There's nowhere in the film, so there's no messaging that tells people what to do. There's no preaching and saying that this is what you should do or this is how something should be conserved. It's really putting an idea out there saying this was this extraordinary relationship which helped Craig heal. So could other people potentially find spaces and methods and ways in nature to heal? And then to also make those connections, because ultimately deep nature connection is really what is going to help us make organic change. Not if I'm standing over you with like a gun or a hammer, you know, and telling you what to do. So yeah,
And so I think if, you know, you're struggling to have a conversation, there are organizations that offer outside help to putting climate into your stories, like the NRDC Rewrite the Future program. It's free, and doing that work for yourself to be able to sort of figure out how to have the conversation with your showrunner or your writers. And I think just trying to bust through the fear of.
Yeah. I think you could also take a page from the Humanitas Award. You know the Humanitas Award? So they're giving out, it's a prize award that's given to writers, content creators for shows or episodes that enhance the human relation. It's very broad, human experience, human relationships. So people don't necessarily write to it, but they are aware of it. And so I think that helps. And it's like a $10,000, you know, they do it in comedy and drama. And I think something like that for award, it would just put it in writers' minds that that's something to think about.
Yeah. And I really encourage all of you to check out some of the incredible resources that we learned about today. A lot of the climate storytelling resources that were just mentioned are sort of collected on climateonscreen.org. And thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists again.